Hi, my name is Kate Whitfield, and I'm a principal with Alta Planning and Design based in Ottawa. So as usual, the goal of each and every episode is to bring together people looking for jobs in Canada and connect them with CITE as an organization in the field of transportation engineering and planning. In this episode, you'll hear about, at first it seems like development applications, but then it turns into a conversation about how you come across, the biases we have, and then it ends with some pretty awesome wisdom about networking and maintaining relationships. So a long episode, but another good one, and let's dive in and meet our guests. I always start off with a CITE member who's currently working the field. So Gary will be first, but first, of course, an introduction, my version of a Gary description. So Gary is an Okanagan branch manager at Creative Transportation Solutions, an engineer responsible for traffic and transportation engineering projects, traffic impact assessments, traffic studies, parking studies, intersection, collision. Yes, but he's way more than that. So I met Gary at a CITE Complete Street workshop 2019. And this was Gary. What about this, Kate? I have an idea over here, Kate. And then eventually at the break said, I do this everywhere I go. You can always get me to stop. And I laughed. I said, don't worry, I will cut you off. So that's a perfect intro to you because there's so much to share here today. But I'll let you share your 2-minute story of a sort of typical job that you do in your workday.
Thanks, Kate. Well, I want to start off by disabusing everyone of the notion that there's such a thing as a typical job, especially in transportation. No such thing exists. I've been in the business now for 33 years, and it's still as exciting and refreshing to me each and every day. Like getting up on a Monday morning is not a chore, and Friday afternoon comes around and I go, what? It can't be Friday. I just find it that interesting and that exciting. And whether it's working with the local government to help them resolve some challenges that they're having with their citizens, or sometimes even working with a local government because they're having a disagreement with either another local government or a senior level government, and helping them to resolve that, or working with private sector clients. Work with lots of different private sector clients, and I'm fortunate enough I get to work all over British Columbia and Northern Canada. So is there such a thing as a typical project? No, not for me. Get involved in get to meet all kinds of interesting people. That's a big part of why I enjoy traffic and transportation, because you meet really interesting people, whether it's young students fresh out of school, or people that are seasoned professionals, and it's a lot of fun. Some of the clients are more challenging than others, and others are really interesting because they've got interesting stories to tell. So yeah, what's a typical project? Well, a typical project is, for me at this point, is writing up a proposal and then sending it out and crossing my fingers and hoping that they like me and the company I'm working for, and then they hire us and hopefully we get paid. That's a big part of working as a consultant, is making sure that you get paid. And for the most part, that does happen. Once in a while, you have to go slap somebody around a little and just go, I'm going to send somebody after you if you don't smarten up. And that usually works, and we get paid. And, I get to deal with the public for public information meetings, public hearings, get to deal with lots of interesting professionals at the local government level. So is there typical? No. Are they fun? Yes, absolutely. There are, I get everything from itty bitty little projects like 11 townhouse units that need to do a traffic study to 1.5 million square feet of industrial space. So yeah, no such thing as typical where I work. Back to you, Kate.
Awesome. And I'm going to explore that thing about sort of working with the private sector and development when we get going, because there's a lot of people whose jobs have to do with developing our cities. But we'll go to our first job seeker. So Matan, you're first, but my quick introduction, Matan is a traffic and transportation designer based in the GTA with a construction engineering degree from a university in Israel. So we met through LinkedIn, immediately impressed with what you've done for networking, right? As someone who has arrived in Toronto in August and then, you know, reached out and built a network. And I know you have some awesome tips later on, which I will ask you to share, even though maybe, you know, they're your top secret tips that you will share with the world. But I'll pass over to you for your 2 minutes there.
Okay, thank you for inviting me. And the project that I will talk about was the feasibility research that we conducted for a bus lane network in Tel Aviv. We got a list of around 30 streets that we had to declare the justification for those bus lanes. It was part of a larger project, a governmental project, connecting the cities around Tel Aviv to Tel Aviv with bus lanes, and I was in charge of connecting those bus lanes to the inner parts of Tel Aviv. And we had lots of meetings with the city, with the Ministry of Transportation, with the city planning teams, and with the city directors. They were very supportive in this project, and they even asked us to add bike lanes and bike paths wherever it was possible. And we produced a report for each streets with lots of information about the number of accidents and the level of service with and without the bus lanes. We created typical sections with the alternative for solution for each street. And at the end of each report, we gave our recommendation whether there was a justification and what would be the chosen, the most recommended alternatives that we would provide. And I was so invested in this project, I attended the approval meeting from Canada, even though I wasn't working on the company anymore. It was very nice to get the approval and for this kind of project. So that's my project.
Oh, that's a great example, and that was really well done. So thank you for sharing it. We'll come back around because I do want those tips. Next is Tamara. So when booking the taping, Tamara was Community Engagement Manager at Cycle Toronto, but since then has accepted the job at FOTAN here in Ottawa as a planner. So that's very exciting, and I'm excited that we're in the same city. Maybe we can hang out. You know, hoping later in the episode you can share a little bit about the job hunt and securing that job. But Tamara has a master's in planning from Ryerson and experience in urban planning, but also not-for-profit sector, right? Which is another good piece to share and hear about. So I'll pass it over to you for your 2 minutes.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, so I worked in a couple different areas before I got my master's in urban planning, and one of those areas was nonprofit work, which I then wound up working in again at Cycle Toronto. So an interesting return to form. And yeah, the career journey has definitely been an interesting one. I've worked across all sorts of different sectors and you know, everything from public to private to institutional with a university. So I've gotten to experience a bit of everything so far when it comes to employment. And with urban planning in particular, I've really gotten to sample a lot of the different jobs that are out there for an urban planner, especially for someone who's interested in transportation planning. So there's definitely a big range. Cycle Toronto is a really good example of a nonprofit doing work in that area. And one of the things that we did a lot while I was working at Cycle Toronto was trying to think about mobility in a more holistic and bigger picture sort of way. So one of the things that I was really happy that we were working on was thinking about how cycling and transit can work together to encourage you know, multimodal forms of transportation. And then we also tried really hard to stay in touch with other local advocacy groups such as Walk Toronto, which although they don't have paid staff like Cycle Toronto does, we tried to stay in touch with them quite a bit. So there's really a lot of interesting jobs and volunteer opportunities as well to get involved in. And you know, Cycle Toronto's board, for instance, had really a really interesting range of people sitting on it. And then our committees were also had a mix of board and members at large. So I got to really I guess experience a lot of different ways of getting involved in transportation in Canada. And Cycle Toronto was, you know, a really good example of how you can do transportation advocacy. And then there's also other ways that I can share later on how to incorporate some of that advocacy into your own work as a transportation planner. and thinking about how to communicate with communities and residents. Thanks, Kate.
Awesome, and it's going to be fun what you get up to at FOTAN in the next while. That's exciting. So next I'll pass it to Safder, one of our job seekers. So Safder has a bachelor degree in civil engineering from McGill. You have a great resume with experience construction, inspector, WSP, and with the TTC, so the Toronto Transit Commission. So I'm just honestly happy to be getting to know you. And so tell us about yourself, please.
Thanks, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. So I graduated in December from McGill with a Bachelor of Civil Engineering degree, like Kate mentioned. So actually, my interest in the field of transportation developed after my co-op terms with WSP, although I was working with the Rail and Transit Department, but I started taking transportation courses after that. And basically, two ideas that fascinate me a lot about the field of transportation are actually the ideas of smart cities and shared space. And my design project was actually kind of connected to both of them. So I was working with advisors from City of Montreal, and basically there's this street in Montreal, Rue Wellington, which is an industrial area, but it's an upcoming residential area. And in the past, there were a lot of accidents involved between the cyclists and the trucks. So basically, we were told, okay, you have to make somehow the cyclists safe on this particular street, but you can't remove the trucks, you can't reroute them. And basically, in the process, we redesigned 4 intersections. We included unidirectional bicycle lanes. We had to deal with the snow problem. We had to deal with the parking lane. And basically, I was the VISIM modeler for my group. But in the end, we achieved all of our design goals. And after working on that particular project, actually, I enjoyed it a lot because we came up with certain suggestions. We took inspiration from Dutch guidelines. After Waller Street in Ottawa, we proposed for the second time truck reserve lane, and actually we achieved good results in the VISIM model. So after doing this design project, I decided like this is something that I want to do, and this is something that I'm passionate about.
That's great. And like hearing about the trucks and goods movement is a huge part too of what we talk about. I know I talk a little bit too much about bikes and walking, but there's a whole subject matter in truck route and goods movement, and that's great there. Also, always awesome to hear what schools are doing for sort of practical experience. So that's really great. Well, our next speaker is Matt. Matt is an EIT with Halifax Regional Municipality. So this is an episode where we get from West Coast to East Coast. Pulled that one off. He's also representing the municipal perspective for typical jobs, which I do try to get in every episode. I'd also like, Matt, I mean, you're giving so much through Engineers Nova Scotia and the Emerging Professionals Committee and what you're doing. I mean, we met through your initiatives to help people find jobs in Nova Scotia, hosting these things too, which I think is wonderful. So if you could start your story, please, of a typical job, maybe at HRM.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kate. So I'm part of the EIT rotation program. So I change business units every 6 months, and currently I'm with Transportation and Public Works. So typical transportation job for me is a small cap project, something under 300K, and often act as a project manager, maybe the assistant to the project manager, depending on the scale. And a typical job might be a sidewalk rehab or maybe a parking lot, something not too involved. But a typical day in municipality is a lot of project management type work. So I'm lucky enough to work from home right now, but I'll be making calls, writing emails, developing tenders, writing other documents, and running meetings. And if I'm really lucky, I'll get to go to a site visit. But I guess ultimately my goal working with the municipality is just trying to improve the built environment using the 3 pillars of sustainability.
And also with that, I mean, you said a bunch of things there, like project management, exposure to that, but then I'm going to actually go back to you, Matt. How much is in a municipal job do you find it is design and it is project management? And then my other fun one was, are you going to tell us what your favorite department is to work for in the 6 months, or are you willing to admit that? I'm just kidding, just kidding.
I'll let you know when I'm finished the whole rotation program. So that's in a few years. And just a big piece of advice to anyone: if you can get into a rotation program, highly recommend it. To go back to the first part of the question, most municipal jobs are a lot of project management, but in Halifax, we're lucky enough to have a lot of really experienced, excellent designers and civil engineers who have a lot of design experience. So they actually stamp drawings, they design in-house, and it's things that that they like over and above that they might push out to consultants.
No, that's great. And finding out how to get one of those jobs is another thing to ask Matt, because I have no idea how one gets into those rotations. But we won't make you wait anymore. Sharon has a master's of engineering with a specialization in transportation engineering from the University of Alberta. But you're based in the GTA now, as far as I know. I don't know much about you, but that's sort of why we do this, right? So you can tell us and we can meet this way. So I'll pass it to you for your introduction.
Sure, thank you, Kate, and good afternoon, everyone. I have completed my Master of Engineering in Transportation Engineering from University of Alberta, and prior to that, I have been working in on the concepts of intelligent transport systems in the back home in India. And then I moved here for my master's, and I've done various projects on the transportation engineering. And out of all, I want to speak now about one of the projects which I have done on the collision data analysis on one of the intersections in the city of Edmonton. So the reason I have selected this topic is like the analysis which I have done on the specific intersection is the hotspot intersection at the city of Edmonton. Like it has nearly 216 collisions, where other intersections were only of 40 or 50 or something. So when we took up this project, like we considered this as the most challenging project, because you are working on at one of the intersections where there are most number of collisions, and which is creating a problem for the city in achieving the Vision Zero concept. So we did the safety data analysis. We went to the field. We have done the field assessment, and then we came up with the issues. We identified the remedies for that, and we have also done the cost benefit analysis, and we saw whether the analysis which we have done could make any difference in further period or not. And then during these studies, like we got an opportunity to review the results which we have done with the City of Edmonton officers, and then we were glad, like they showed some progress, like they were impressed with our remedies which we have introduced, which could make a difference. And that was the first project which I have done in Canada, and that was the first project which I have done in front of some officials or with the City of Edmonton. So I would consider this project is the most memorable during my master's, even though I have done the various concepts. So that is what I want to express, and back to you, Clay.
I mean, what a wonderful project to get to be involved with, and everything you mentioned there had so much to do with data and Vision Zero and solution finding, but also presenting before decision makers, right? So wow, what a opportunity. That's great. Well, an impressive bunch. So the next part isn't scripted, right? We try and get a conversation going. So, I mean, Gary, I'm gonna go to you with just very specific, but we talk so much about working with developers.
Yep.
And some firms, that is the bulk of what they do. Doesn't mean they don't work with a city.
Yep.
Can you give even the driest, but like what do we mean when we say a transportation engineer working with a developer? What are you actually talking about?
Well, it really depends on the scale of the project and the scope of the project, and whether you're dealing with a first-time developer or a seasoned developer. I mean, there's quite a range. Typically what happens is that you get someone comes with a project, whether it's a residential, let's just pick an easy one. Let's just say it's a residential project, and you've got someone that's got a 200-unit apartment building, and they've got a piece of land and they want to build this 200-unit, and they know all about building, and then they go into the city, and the city turns around and says to them, well, you need to do a traffic study. And then they first get a glazed look on their face. It goes, traffic study? What's a traffic study? What do I have to do a traffic study? They understand structural, they understand architectural, they even understand some of the civil stuff, but they don't understand necessarily about the traffic study. So then they look around, and hopefully they hire CTS, and we start talking to them about doing a traffic study. We give them a proposal, and we say to them, what we're doing is that we're giving independent advice to you and to the city to sort of say, what is the traffic effect of your development? Now, historically, that being when I was a young engineer like the rest of you, traffic effect simply meant vehicles. Fortunately, we've progressed a lot in the last bunch of years, and this gets back to Tamara's points about multimodal. It's critically important to talk about multimodal, and one of my biggest struggles with some developers, not all, but with some developers, is to show to them that, look, it benefits your development if you've got good pedestrian access, if you show good connectivity to transit network, if you provide, good bicycle, end of trip facilities and the like. We're fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your perspective, that it has to be mandated by municipalities, but that's the way it is. So we go off, we do our traffic counts, and we count cyclists, we count buses, we count trucks, and yes, we even do count cars. Yeah. And then we take all of that information and we start doing some analysis. So sometimes it's with the intersections, sometimes it's a pedestrian crossing warrant analysis, sometimes it's a roundabout, or a left turn warrant, or all the rest of that. And we put together a report that says, your 200-unit development, in order for it to get approved, you need to make the following changes to and I'm using these words very deliberately, ladies and gentlemen, transportation network. It is no longer a road network. It is a transportation network. So the recommendations could be a left turn phase, adding a crosswalk, putting in a roundabout, upgrading a bus stop, making a connection to the bicycle network. And then we give that report and to the client. They take a look at it and say, yes, generally you got your facts straight. Goes off to the road authority. The road authority looks at it, goes, yep, generally we're happy with it. Sign it and seal it. And sometimes that's the end of it. And sometimes the client says, well, I want you there at public hearing because transportation is an issue, and we want to have our consultants at the public hearing to answer any questions that come up. So that, in a nutshell, is the traffic study. Now, in terms of timeline, they can take as little as 3 or 4 weeks. I've got projects. I have a project that I'm working on. I started that in 2017, and we're still going. It's just
but there's so much
complicated.
Yeah, but there's so much in what you just talked about that also relates to other guests that we have here. So Gary's opening line was like, for engineers assessment, independent assessment of the traffic impact of a development, right? So a typical job for a junior through any level is the model, the data inputs, following the city's rules for different variables. Okay, but then Tamara, I'm gonna guess in your new job, you might be the planner on the file that's taking the traffic study and other studies and working through Planning Act rules to allow the development. And maybe Matt, on one of his rotations, is the engineer reading the traffic study and saying, yep, you met the rules, yep, you're okay with it, but this is what I want you to pay for, developer, if I'm gonna let you, through the authority I'm allowed to make you pay. And then that's where Gary has to come back sometimes and debate in this fictitious Okanagan Valley to Halifax, Ottawa meld of a scenario, So as the transportation engineer, you might be negotiating who pays for what, when you pay for it, and then also in front of engaged in consultation. And then that's fun in itself, because there's a lot of this, Gary, you rigged the numbers to say what you wanted to say, so blah 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 in a public meeting is you're evil, Gary. And so it's also backing it through process, through engineering, professional opinion, professional planner opinion from that side. So that's why I wanted to do that story, because it does represent a lot of typical jobs, because there's a lot of people that do those studies, and they can be repetitive, Gary. You make it sound exciting with different scales, but they can also be repetitive, right?
Yep, totally.
Yeah.
Well, especially repetitive. I'll be blunt. If you're the junior engineer, typically the junior engineer is the one that's sort of cranking the handle. Whether it's the data processing or creating the figures or running the synchro analysis or the VSIM analysis, whatever the case may be. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm taking it from the perspective as a very senior, or as we like to refer to it in our company, the senior engineer / project manager. But again, if you find the right firm to work with, hopefully the project managers, and I think Matt, you hinted at it too, is that the project managers bring you along, whether it's in the office, showing you and helping you to understand what the process is, or taking you to outside meetings so that you get some familiarity with what it's like to, whether it's interfacing with the public or interfacing with the client, or the road authority. I mean, that's all part and parcel, especially as a young engineer, gaining your experience, making yourself open to those new experiences. Don't just sort of sit there passively and say, okay, well, I'm going to wait for my boss to tell me the next thing to do. No, be a little proactive here, ladies and gentlemen, and reaching out and saying, hey, I got some spare time, or hey, I'm working with you on this file and this is really interesting. Can you tell me more and explain more and help me to understand better?
Yeah. So Tamara, what about you? Like, what job did you get with FOTAN? Are you a development planner or a transportation? Tell us more, because that's a good way of thinking about sort of the planner side and private sector as well.
Yeah, so I've got a job as a planner with FOTAN. I haven't started there yet, so I can't say for sure what it will entail, but from what they've told me, there's a big focus on development. And one of the things that I've kind of learned, because I've worked in private consulting before, is that there's a bit of a perfect blend for private versus public contracts when you're a private consultant. If you take on too many private contracts and you want to get into public, at a certain point you're going to have conflicts all over the place, because it'll be the other side of the coin of a similar project. So and when I worked previously in private consulting, we did more of a, maybe not a 50-50 split, I don't know the exact numbers, but there was a bit of a balance between some private development contracts and a couple, a bit of public development. There were some international contracts as well. So when I was the urban planner on the file, it could come down to a couple of things. First off, it would often depend on whether we were the lead consultant or the sub-consultant. If we were the lead consultant, then I was the one responsible for tracking down all the reports, like the transportation or the traffic report from a transportation planning firm, and then making sure that it adhered to all of the city's requirements. Depending on the city, they could be very different. So I worked mostly, most of our big projects were in Toronto, but I did work on a couple bigger projects in Mississauga, which was somewhat new for the firm at the time. And I also worked on a couple sort of just reconnaissance projects, trying to find the right site for another client at a different in a different context, where it was all of Southern Ontario. So it meant like trying to find the official plan, trying to find if it was readable. Sometimes it was really not. If it was a smaller municipality, it looked like it had just been photocopied and written on and scanned in. So it really, really depended on the project and whether, you know, because a lot of the private urban planning consulting firms, if they're not focused in transportation planning, they're not doing those plans. So often when I was looking at them, it was me taking everything and trying to make sure that it fit what the city wanted. So I'd have, you know, my hydrology report, and I'd read it and try to understand it. I usually had to call the engineer a couple times and say, like, please explain it to me. What does this mean? Am I meeting the requirements? What are the requirements? So that was a lot of the work that I did, was trying to make heads and tails of tons of different engineer reports, and then figuring out if that was adhering to the city, what they wanted. And then once I was certain, like, okay, I think we've got the right thing, I've got the right information, you submit it to the city, and then they'd bring back the feedback. Then you build your Excel spreadsheet and you track all the comments and the responses. So yeah, that's what that usually looked like on my end, at least.
Yeah, and there's a lot in there about what type of jobs. So you know, a firm that has private sector, right? So they work with developers, maintaining that, you know, professional planner, professional engineer, but their day is land development, right? Versus some other firms might only work for cities, and it could be help even reviewing those land development applications as third-party reviewers, or big city environmental assessments, big picture kind of projects. Matt, do you want to add anything from a municipal perspective? And if you won't, my trick question is, what do you think about your decision to go municipal in your EIT training versus private sector? I'm going to keep putting you on the spot all episode. Like, any thoughts on why municipal and not, was private intriguing at all? Private sector?
I guess first question, I'm just always overwhelmed by the number of stakeholders in any project, big or small, in the transportation network. There's just so many individuals with like a stake in the street right of way that need to be consulted. They really do, and need to be brought in. Like, think about all the utilities, the local residents, fire, transit, and like specifically water, and then all the internal ones within the municipality of like who can think higher level, can think lower level to a project. And they have such great perspective that often it's the project manager's job to accept, like, they are not the smartest person in the room. At least that's what I accept all the time. And hearing everyone's experience today, I definitely accept that. But then taking in what everyone's saying and just trying to create a successful project in the end that might not make everyone happy, but will positively impact the most people the most, with minimizing the negatives. And I guess the side on municipal versus private. So I'm just a really big fan of my municipal government. I like an advocate. Tamara, like, your work just sounds really exciting. That's like advocating for cycle lanes is something I would just do to volunteer. I would like interacting with the city, and when I found out this is a possibility, it was like, wow, I feel like I'm going, my hobby is going pro. So that's, I guess, one of the reasons. And I definitely think there's a huge benefit in going private first versus going government. Like, because we don't have billable hours, you have to be your own like your own driver of your work. From what I hear, like there's a lot of troubles with managing the work-life balance on the private side, but then at the same time, you excel so much quicker with your experience. So I have to just continually be on myself. It's like, am I going at as close to 100% as possible, and really pushing myself to the point of that breaking level, but still staying sane. But I just mean, if you don't have that, I think yeah, it would be hard to grow at the same level as private.
So I want to jump in. So Matt, because I just find that your response is fascinating. I mean, like I've spent roughly half my career in the public sector and half my career in the private sector. I started in the private sector and then eventually moved into the public sector. And at one point I was even the head of the engineering department for a small city in the Lower Mainland. And people say to me, well, which one do you like better, or which one's better? And I go, well, there's no such thing as better. They're just different. Each one has its pluses and each one has its minuses. And, you know, and I just encourage young engineers, yeah, if you can start in the private sector, great, start in the private sector, but make sure that you find something that fits you well. The only exception I would say to that is exactly the situation you've got yourself in, Matt, where you're working for a municipality and you get to, as an EIT, and you get to move around every 6 months. To me, like that, I completely agree with you. I think that is just a terrific way to get started because it opens you up to and exposes you to a whole bunch of different, you know, facets of our industry. And then you can start to gain experience that way. So, you know, but again, you know, I encourage all young engineers to take a, you know, a really hard look at themselves and ask themselves, you know, what kind of a work environment do you want to work in? And you know, what's your personality like? And spend time thinking about that and asking yourself okay, is sort of a government role a good fit, or is a private sector role a better fit? And that can change. I want to really emphasize to all of you, okay, that just because you start, whether it's in government or private sector, that doesn't necessarily mean you're slotted there for the rest of your career. For some folks, yeah, and you know what? They're completely happy. Great, more power to you. Other folks, such as myself, yeah, I've been back and forth. Crikey, I've worked in, you know, I've worked in Alberta, I've worked in BC, and I've worked in New Zealand. So, you know, and different levels of government and different types of consultants, big consultants, small consultants. So you need to find your niche.
Yeah, and then another one, but maybe Matt answers this once in a LinkedIn post, is how on earth did you get that great job with HRM though? Because it's also an element of like getting that kind of dream. If that's a dream job with rotation for a great city, then that's not that easy to grab.
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Of course, there's luck that comes into play, and I think it's something we all have to accept. Like those first jobs, we're like, yes, we're lucky, but we also probably set up a lot of things. So for me, it was about a year of targeted work. So I made sure that I was presenting to key leaders in the municipality with my capstone project in engineering, like that 4th-year project. So presenting to the AT group, presenting to the different groups in TPW, as well as like more general groups within the city, organizing networking events and making sure I brought in key leaders from the city so they listened to me speak and address a large group and saw me as a leader. Even though I didn't really feel like one, I put myself in the situation where like that was viewed. Then also interacting with people from all levels, just like casually with the city, just learning more about the job application process, because every business likely has their specific language, especially in government. For HRM, there's the competency dictionary, and if you can speak to that in the application interview process, you will succeed. And same with federal government, each department has their own similar competency dictionary. And then also like the interview stage, and sorry, this is so many tips all at once. I practice. Like you have to practice interviews. It's a learned skill. Just like Michael Jordan just didn't walk up and be Michael Jordan. He practiced day in, day out. So I get people to run through interviews with me. So it was a long arduous process, but it was exciting and fun at the same time.
Awesome. And so, Matan, when we met, you told me some tips and a little bit of feedback on networking. Are you willing to share them here today?
Sure, of course. At some point I realized that I was missing some skills, like computer software. I contacted software companies and I asked for a student license for them. And I took online classes and I learned a few software that I had to add to my resume. And I think that networking is the most important thing. It took me 5 months until I started actually networking. And there are some amazing people out there. They're just waiting to be contacted. So don't hesitate and try to meet as much as you can. People have helped me working on my resume and working on my cover letters, and I'm very grateful for that. And another tip that I had was post on LinkedIn and try to generate content, interesting content. So you have me personally. I need to write more, and it's something that I need to improve. And the last thing that I did was I tried to get a hold on manuals, and I was going over them and mark the important things so I can adjust the things that I know from my country to the Canadian manuals. So that's it. That's my.
That's great. That's great. I want to say something about CITE though. No, I got to plug something. I think CITE needs to listen to this because Matan would be newcomer to Canada, needing access to software and manuals and people, but not employed. So unlikely to buy a membership to an organization he has no idea will be great for him. So it's also on CITE to meet someone like you. It goes both ways in networking because an organization wants you as a member. Yep. And they want you to have a job in this field because you're gonna get one and you're gonna be great, contribute to the profession and all that good stuff. But like you need help because if you can't, another woman had an interview and she needed to do a trip generation sample for her interview. How can she do that if she didn't have the manual? Yeah. Maybe there's something in what you're talking about, Matan, that could be what an organization could help more with because there's a lot in there of what you're talking about. But my other line that you said to me was that networking is exhausting.
Yes.
And you have to, like, some people won't respond, and that's okay, right? Like, you just have to do it and keep going, right? And then find those moments.
Yes, and once you meet the people, I find it very motivating and super encouraging. So don't get exhausted by approaching to people, and concentrate on the people that do answer. And they're amazing. People are amazing.
I want to follow up a little bit too on what you said, Matan. I mean, like different employers have different ways of approaching, and I'm Kate. I don't know what it is with Alpha and stuff, but like at a junior level, we're sort of CTS, and my personal expectation of an EIT is like I'm not expecting you to have all of the technical skills. What I'm looking for is attitude. Okay, do you have a good attitude? Are you personable? I mean, recognizing that I'm coming at it from a consulting perspective. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. But I'm looking for attitude. I'm looking, when we do an interview, when we talk, when we're networking, do you look me in the eye? Do you smile? Do you, just these little cues, but they're so important. Okay. So as an EIT, because I recognize that when we bring you on, that we need to train you in terms of how CTS does its work. Okay. Whether it's, where do we store our files, paper and electronic? How do we produce the reports? What software we use? All the rest of it. The key thing that we're looking for is, do you have that piece of paper that says P.Eng on it, or sorry, EIT? Okay, are you an EIT? Have you graduated from a recognized university so that we can say, yeah, you know what, we can teach this individual. when I talk about be over C, they don't look at me blankly, right? You know, just these little things like this, and okay, and that's where we start from. Now, obviously, if I was looking for someone with 10 years of experience, well, the interview goes and the expectations are a whole lot different. But as an EIT, from CTSs and my own personal experience over the years, I'm looking for attitude. I'm looking.
Yeah, but Gary, let's be honest. We got to make sure Matan gets past to meet you.
Yeah.
So and I'm not going to put Matan on the spot about that, but we have some issues in Canada on helping someone meet the person to then have the chance to have that conversation on the case, because there's a lot of CVs that are skipped over, and every episode we talk about how to get noticed, how to get past, how to break down barriers, and yeah.
But to me, the breaking down the barriers is exactly going back to what Matt said. What did Matt do? He got, I'll put it crassly, but he got in the face of the people that do the hiring and make the decisions for the HRM.
Yeah, but we gotta be careful. Matt is a personable white guy from Nova Scotia that has a job in the city that he probably grew up in, right, Matt? Like, did you grow up in Halifax?
Yeah, I'd say that.
I know what you're saying there, but that's why I want to talk about like other ways of making connections and like getting noticed and
volunteer through your local CITE chapter, volunteer through your local planning chapter, help organize, whether it's the monthly meetings or a conference or whatever. Get yourself involved and you meet people, because when you're helping to organize these things, it's not just a one-off thing. No, you have, like, if you're, for example, helping to organize one of the CITE annual conferences, you start meeting people.
There's a plug there. It's coming up soon. Register.
Yeah. Right, but you know, there's two. If you're on the conference organizing committee, you're starting to meet 2 years in advance, right? And so you get to meet all kinds of different people. You know, I'm unabashedly a fan of ITE and CITE. I mean, that's where so much of my growing and my networking has happened, because I've gotten involved with these organizations. And I'm not saying it's just ITE. I want to be clear. Yes, I know this is a CITE Career Connect, but it's not just CITE. You know, there's the provincial professional association, so PEO in Ontario, EGBC here in British Columbia, the planning institutes, you know, all of these organizations, and they're a terrific way. And hey, they're always looking for fresh meat.
Yeah, well, Matan's been promoting YPT equity events there in Toronto. I noticed that on LinkedIn, Matan. So I want to talk a bit. Yeah, that's a good way. We've talked about that as a good way to connect. So I always pick a career topic or a theme, and I was going to try one that's a little different. We'll see how it goes, but it starts with a story. So I told you how I met Gary, but what you can't tell is Gary is 6'9". In his desk there, he's 6'9". With that deep voice.
I'll put it in perspective.
Yeah, he's 6'9". So as we discuss this, so Gary and I meet at a TAC conference in Ottawa, and we happen to sit together at dinner. And Gary and I have this great conversation, because I'm looking at him like this, and I'm like, when you walk around, there's a certain authority to you. And also when you mentor people, he told me that he sits down to not tower over and intimidate. So we had a lovely conversation about how you come across, how you treat people. So the contrast to Gary would have been myself. So I would have been 19, a construction site in New Brunswick. I look like the girl next door. No one assumes I'm going to do anything bad, but either someone thinks I'm their daughter or an object or written off. Through my career, an object, yeah, I don't need to explain that, Matt, I think. Middle of my career, a mom card came in handy a lot. That's sort of the role, the label you get. And now I have authority, so people don't really talk over me or write me off. But I use a lot of humor. Gary uses a lot of humor too, so we have that in common. But my point is, our experiences are very different, right? And thinking about what we assume of somebody, thinking about just because you didn't experience doesn't mean it does not happen to others, and sort of how you come across and true to yourself, right? Like my humor is true to me. That's how I am. People who know me, I'm always like this. But that's how I found my way too when I'm in a room. But man, I'm still, when I'm in a room, I can get lots of different sort of ways people converse with me. In a public meeting, my last job, a member of the public would yell at my boss, so an older white male, and then not be able to yell at me because they just couldn't bring themselves, which is might sound wonderful, but that's a weird interaction. I'm in charge and you will not yell at me, but you'll verbally abuse somebody else. It's also about not your job to deal with someone else's expectations. So the idea of how we talk to someone to smile or to be a certain way to make someone else uncomfortable, right, is a whole other subject too. So that open-mindedness to sort of like your own experience and how that informs other people's experiences. So it's a long intro to a very big subject, but it's also about sort of acknowledging where you come from, what you bring, and the experience of those around you, and changing the game too, so that the norm isn't the way it's been in the past, and that we, you know, that we as a profession change and value different things. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to add something in there, unmute. Tamara, if you want. We had a lovely conversation, Tamara, about how one thing about you walk in a room and you don't question if you belong in it. So I'll put you on the spot, maybe if you want to explain that statement, because that's a powerful one.
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of mentioned this at the beginning. I've had a bunch of different jobs, and I've tackled all sorts of different things. You know, I've been working since I was in grade 11, basically. So one of the things that I don't think I've ever thought too deeply about was, you know, if someone told me this is your job, I'll say like, all right, I'll go do it. But that, you know, just the confirmation that you're there to do a job carries with it a certain degree of confidence that can be lacking if you don't have someone, like in my case, I had a lot of mentors who would say like, okay, you're the planner, you have to go do this. So there was someone who gave me, you know, the go ahead, and then I just felt very secure, and I never really worried about if I walked into the room, would someone take me seriously or not, because that hadn't even crossed my mind sometimes. And I know for
good for you.
Thanks.
No, seriously, good for you. That's a terrific attitude. No, seriously, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's something that I hear a lot from my friends and from other women and non-binary folks is, you know, when they walk into the room, sometimes all eyes are on them and they feel self-conscious, or you know, maybe they're just a little introverted or introspective and they think very deeply about how people react to them. And you know, I think this is to a degree personality and to a degree learned. But so many times I've just been in charge of, you know, I have my own little fiefdom. You know, I was in charge of this one specific thing, and I would go into a meeting, and maybe I'm not the lead presenter on anything. I'm just there to say my piece, and I say it, and that's it. And that, you know, sometimes that's really challenging because I love diving in and chit-chatting with people and getting to know my clients, and I love meeting everyone. I like to know how my clients tick, you know, and I really, really like just want to build a rapport so that if anything comes up, like we're prepared, we know each other well, and we can, you know, we can both be frustrated together if something's behind schedule, even if it's my fault. So that's also a challenge for me because I want to go in, I want to be personable, I want to get along with people. I'm not looking to kick up a fuss. But at the same time, you know, it can be challenging if, you know, I've switched careers and I've been used to running a meeting and I go in and suddenly I am the lowest person on the totem pole. That's also a wild thing to deal with, because maybe I've had to be the person, you know, running communications for a multi-day conference, and you know there are reporters calling me asking for interviews with some of our members. I go from that, and then I switched and went from, you know, I went from a communications role to an urban planning role, and suddenly I'm the smallest fish in a big pond, and I've got to like tamp it down. So there's definitely flip sides, but the upside is when I get that responsibility and I'm told, okay, lead the presentation, sometimes it comes easily. Sometimes I look at the boardroom and think, oh goodness, there's so many people watching me. I hope this goes well.
So my always, Tamara, my advice always to that, especially for my young engineers, because I work with a lot of young engineers right now in our firm, and I try when possible to give them opportunities to be the presenter. And I say, just remember one thing, you're the subject matter expert. And these folks have brought us on board because they don't know this stuff, we do. And to help them along, I say to them, look, I'm right here in the meeting with you to backstop you. So if something goes a little sideways, fine, don't worry about it. I'm here to help you out.
Totally. Yeah, and as I've worked as sort of the junior planner in a couple positions, and then I went on to become the communications engagement manager at Cycle Toronto. But even in my junior position, and also as a manager, I was there to tell them what I knew. And when I got a question I couldn't answer, like there was no point just guessing stuff. If you ever do interviews with journalists, you will learn this immediately. Anything that you say as a side comment or you speculate or think, that's a really good question, perhaps this. They will take that and they will publish only that. They will not publish anything else you said. So taking that same sort of mindset into the boardroom when you're presenting, if you're there to do a rundown of all your projects, that's what you're there for. If they have questions about like, what do you think about this zoning designation? They've recently changed and they've introduced a new R4. That's not what you're there to present to. And then I turn to someone like Gary and say like, hey, do you know the answer to this question? Because every time I've gotten in trouble, it's been when I've tried to answer a question I don't know the answer to.
Yep. Like again, the bullshit meter that people have, especially senior people and reporters, it's so finely attuned, they can tell when you're not and right on with it, and they will smell that and they'll just go for the jugular. So you have way more credibility, to your point, Tamara. You have way more credibility to say, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer for it, but I'll get back to you in the next 24 to 48 hours with an answer.
Yeah, and there's some beauty in that too, of people respect to when you don't just talk all the time, know every answer, and not bend when you admit that you're wrong too, right? Like that's a beauty one too. Sharon, you have a question. I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the networking. Like, in general, like before 2020, I know you people have been in industry for quite long time, and I think many people have contacted you in person. And then after 2020, and there might be many people contacting you through the LinkedIn. Like, do you see the difference in the number of people reaching out to you, or at some point do you feel like the networking has an effect, like it has stopped somewhere or reduced somewhere, if you get what I mean?
That's a great question, Sharon.
I'd say it's improved, right? Like you have access to people because you might not be paying to go to a conference because an employer would pay for a conference or something like that, and also permission by a company to go to a conference. So it's a different type of LinkedIn interaction now, right? Like it's not, I saw you speak there and you walk up to someone in a room. It's more like how Matan and I met, right? Like it's, hello, nice to meet you. I'm interested in a job in our field, or even just hello, nice to meet you is also a nice, just enough, right? You don't need to ask someone for something. It can just be a connection and it starts there. So I don't think it's a different number. I think it's changing a little bit.
Yeah, because I got this doubt, like, because if I'm in a public meeting or in some career fair event, I have the chance to talk with the person where you have one-on-one conversation and you tell something about yourself. And when it comes to the LinkedIn or some any other platform, I just send an introduction email saying like I'm so and so, I have done this. I sometimes wonder like if the other person really reads the entire message, like do they have the time? Like when compared to the one-in-one per meeting, like it's different, right? You engage and you speak. So
Yeah,
I thought,
yeah, there's something to be said for not too long, because there's a lot of people that write letters to you and you won't make it down. There's also something to be said, like in your intro, you talked about Vision Zero, you said road safety, like there's ways of making you a little more memorable than I am interested in the field of transportation engineering.
Yes.
Those things help give someone something to contact you back about.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes it does help if I know what actually someone is looking for, because some people make it very clear, just want to connect. I just thank you for your network. Then I'm not wondering, okay, do they want me to do something?
Yeah.
But I need something about, you need to give something about you, or there's no content to grab onto, I guess. Tamara, you're gonna offer something there?
Yeah, I used to get emails from folks when I worked at Cycle Toronto asking to connect with me or chat with me. And the challenge that I always had was it was never made clear why they were contacting me in particular, whether it was me at Cycle Toronto or me as a professional. And then also like what were the parameters? What did they want to get out of it? What were they hoping to get from me to make the interaction worth their time? And was it too much? So people would often, we got really, we would get short messages sometimes in our email inbox that would say like, hey, here's the thing. You'd read it and you'd say, okay, this is a short message, I'll read it. But the time it would take me to respond to those messages could be, up to half an hour. Just because the way to answer it was very complex. I had to go pull information from here and there to get back to them. So when I did respond to people, I tried my best, but sometimes it was just like the question they had was so big. So I would say like when I was working and would get those messages, what I was really looking for was like, why do you want to connect with me in particular? And like, how can I help you? And like, what kind of time am I putting into it? So I did connect with a couple of people just to like learn more about their projects to see how we could help each other out. But yeah, I think that was the thing I was always looking for, because I was, admittedly not billing my hours, but I also was doing program management a lot more than project management, which meant I had tons of small tasks to achieve bigger program goals. And the day-to-day work could be really intense. So I didn't always have the time to just chit chat with someone unless they were, clear in their needs and how I could help them.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. The other thing one of the other things is that if you can establish a connection with somebody, like that's at the mid to senior level, and you've got a good rapport, is that you can use that individual to leverage connections. So, for example, if we're looking for someone, or even if we're not looking for someone, if there's someone that I know that has said, I'll use Kate as the example. So Kate calls me up and says, or sends me a message, says, Gary, I've got Sharon is moving to the Kelowna area and is interested in road safety. Do you know anybody that is hiring, or that he could talk to? Okay, like leveraging your connections that way can go a long ways, because otherwise, back to Tamara's point is that your inbox, whether it's on LinkedIn or your email, gets filled with all of these kinds of requests, and you go, how do I pick which one I want to answer? I've got a lot of stuff on my plate. Whereas if I'll pick on you, Sharon, is that if you say to Kate, hey, Kate, I'm interested in, going back to your presentation, road safety, and I'd like to work in Halifax. Do you know anyone? And Kate says, hey, I know this Matt guy, and he works for the Halifax Regional Municipality. I'll reach out to him on your behalf and see if there's a connection that we can establish that way. Okay. So from my perspective, and I'm curious to hear what others have to say, you know, like just sort of doing what I refer to as the shotgun approach and hoping that one of the pellets hits something of use. To me, that's not an effective use of your time, and it sure as heck isn't going to be an effective use of my time. But it's
super tricky though, because we're going to give you so much mixed messages. Because the other part though is, since we've never worked together, I won't recommend put my name to people that I don't know or have never seen their work. So there's other ways. Sometimes people will say, I won't give you a name, but I will tell them myself and they'll reach out to you. And then I can say, like, listen, this person I think is pretty awesome from what I could tell, but I'm not like we've worked together, because there is an element of that to be careful of. Yeah. But
totally.
I think still, yeah, the principles were there, right? Like, what do you need from somebody, and a little something that helps you differentiate. I'm also going to layer on extra advice, and then I'm going to go to Safder, but I have one other little small thing. As a woman on LinkedIn, I do not respond to hi. I don't know what someone's asking me. So I know there's so many rules, but don't do that, because I don't know if that's crossing into like a dating thing or inappropriateness, because we're also not friends. Like, we're not going to discuss what I did this weekend or my kids, right? So that's the other part. Waste of time to do that. Like, keep it to like, this is what I'm looking for, or it is okay to say just, you know, great to be in your network, right? And you can find your different ways of interacting with people, but I can just, because I'll cover this cohesively, that is, just don't even do that, because then you won't get an answer most likely. Safder, you unmuted a while ago. I want to give you a chance to talk.
So actually, I just wanted to add to the earlier discussion that we were having. So like before, like when I started my first co-op term, actually it was quite intimidating. When I was on construction site and I was attending those like meeting minutes with the contractors, there was a bit of yelling going around as well. And as a co-op student, and especially if you are an international student and you actually graduate, you're studying at a Canadian university, it's a whole new experience. And when you are on site as a site inspector, you have to basically back up your manager claims, and basically you're in a tight spot. And I figured out, like, in the beginning, I was a bit intimidated. I used to be quiet, but I had a great team. I had great mentors. My managers, they pushed me, and actually I started studying the shop drawings in detail, the contract specifications in detail. I made my notes, and basically when you have your notes, but like these things exist because when you are a student, things get intimidating. But if you have points to back you up, if you do your research, like you can swim, you won't sink. So that's my advice. Basically, do your work. Just if you have all the points, if you think that okay, you can back up your claims, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, you will definitely feel intimidated in the first 2-3 weeks, but after that, it gets okay.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you said, Safder. I mean, the thing is that, you know, Kate's touched on the sexism that exists. You know, there's racism that exists. There's ageism that exists. Oh, well, you're young. What the hell do you know? Excuse my French, but that's, you know, and I go, you know, and I'm sure that I have been guilty of it, of any and all of those things at one point or another in my career, you know, despite my best efforts. Okay. But at the end of the day, I'm trying really hard, and I look to, you know, end of the day, when I get a resume, I have one objective. Can this individual do the job? Yes or no? Okay. And if the answer is yes, great, let's bring them on board and let's see what we can do together to produce some terrific transportation work. That's my goal at this stage in my career, and I can echo that on behalf of my company president and our company as a whole. That's the way we approach it. It's not about, your gender. It's not about where you originated from. It's not about your age. It's about, can you do the work? Yes or no? And, are you going to be part? are you going to fit in and be a part of our team? And I recognize 120% that not every firm, government or private sector, works that way. I understand that. But again, my advice is, as you know, a job searcher, do your research on the company. Talk to folks. Find out, if you can, find out, you know, what is it like to work with that company? What is it like, you know, what if you can talk to the people that are working already in that company? Find out, talk to them. Ask them, you know, what's it like working here? You know, what does your week look like? Get an understanding, and then very critically ask yourself, is that the way I want to work?
So Sharon, do you have a question there?
Yeah, I have a question regarding the resume for the entry level roles, because I have been talking with several people and getting my resume reviewed, and I hear like the mixed reviews. Like some people then they suggest like the resume when you are describing about your academic projects, just say what you did and just say what were your results. And when I'll go with that. And then when I have the review with one other person, like they want like if you just say like you used AutoCAD or Civil 3D or HCS or Synchro, it doesn't capture much. Show them what you have done using this software. Like what, like did you, like I told you about the Vision Zero or collision process. I just said like we have done the benefit cost analysis and this was the result. Instead using like that, it's better if you mention like you have suggested to add some driver feedback signs, or if you use some technical words and make your resume lengthy, it makes a difference. So I just want to ask, in your personal perspective, like what do you prefer, like the descriptive resume or a very short resume?
You've already hit it on the head, though. There's going to be different opinions and preferences, right? And that's just the reality. But I would err on the side of shorter is better.
See, there comes heightism again.
What?
Heightism. It's not shorter. Brevity.
Awesome.
It's this thing against tall folks. It just keeps coming up. It's very subtle.
Tall folks. Okay. A big thing we keep saying in these episodes is the more that you can use language that shows you understand what the type of job is. So you use those stories to show you understand the job. But long answers do not get read. I'm
Correct.
sorry, and there's more errors for writing style and grammatical, and so short and sweet, get someone's attention, and then once they meet you, then you can have that conversation about it. But I think you'll have a better chance getting it. Matan, you want to add to that, or you have another question?
I have another question.
Okay.
I want to go back to networking and hear your thoughts about how to maintain a relationship. I mean, when I'm networking with someone, it's about creating a connection, a genuine connection, and I don't know how to do the next step, or if you have any thoughts about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because we've talked about this a couple times, because it's a skill in learning how to pick up on the cues of what type of relationship you're going to have. So that's unfair to say that you'll be perfect at that, right? And also, so people will help you understand sort of what kind, like when it turns into mentorship, right? When it turns into more, and also people will give you those hints, but it's a big ask to say you have to be able to read all that. Matt, you must have a tip on this front. Do you have a suggestion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In some respects, it goes to the idea that you don't dig up your seeds every day to see how much they've grown. So depending on like how many people you're networking with, it's like slowly getting a friend. Like your first day with a new friend, you're not going to be like, we're going on a trip to Europe together, especially now amid a pandemic. But it can slowly progress to more like a deeper friendship or connection. So first, it can be the surface level. It's about like this industry or jobs, but then like personal interests might pepper in, and then the connection becomes that personal interest. And then that's how the conversation keeps going. And every once in a while, it's like, oh yeah, this job thing pops up, or they're just like, hey, here's a job for you, or like you can bring it back to that. But that's the enjoyable conversation, because like when we come home from work, like maybe we might say how our day went, but we want to talk about our hobbies, or we want to we want to put work to the side.
Go back.
And then connections can also be like, how can you provide something for them? That's what I think networking is. It's like it's sharing something for someone else all the time, how to make their life easier. Because if that's the case, they're going to want to talk to you again and again, because they know they have your support, and they know you're a leader.
Yeah, that was a brilliant answer. We might need to end the episode on that nugget, because that was that good, and I might need to put it in the front end, because that was wise.
I love the analogy of the
How
sea.
short you are. I don't know how your height for our height jokes, but because we've never met in person, right? No, that's awesome. So on that note, everybody, thank you very much for participating today, getting this conversation going, and it's not over. And I always mention Steve, who's hiding in the background, and how Steve wants me to say, follow it on, like and subscribe on YouTube, so you know when new episodes are coming. But also, this is the chance to register for the conference, because Steve is working very hard on making the June CITE conference amazing. So thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you.
In a few minutes, but thank you, everybody. So we'll wrap up there.